I would like to welcome everyone this evening to our Monday Night Wellness webinar. And this evening, the topic for discussion is cancer prevention. And we have Dr. Steve Chaney, who has multiple degrees in chemistry and biochemistry, and he has taught first-year medical students and ran an active cancer research program at the University of North Carolina. Steve will be our key presenter this evening. And then Barbara Lagoni, who's a Cornell graduate with a degree in food science and nutrition, will be working with Steve this evening. Barb formerly was with Craft Kitchen. She's written a cookbook and has been actively involved in nutritional counseling and educating thousands of people in the use of nutritional supplements and dietary changes for close to 40 years. So I'm looking forward to this evening and our learning about how to prevent cancer.
Well, thanks, Joe. And hi, Steve, you're there?
I am here.
Good. Okay. Well, Joe just did a great introduction of Dr. Chaney. I just want to add a couple of things because Dr. Chaney ran a cancer research program for 37 years and was awarded almost $9 million in grants and contracts around that research. And he's internationally known for his research on the biochemistry of platinum anti-cancer drugs. That sounds kind of interesting. Sounds expensive, Steve. And
anti-cancer drugs are kind of expensive, but yeah.
Right, in general, but if they're made out of platinum, I would think that would be interesting. He helped develop a drug that represents a major advance in colon cancer treatments. So what a exciting background you have had. But one of his prized awards is being awarded the Excellence in Teaching Lifetime Achievement Award. And we are quite honored because he is a quintessential teacher, and he has come to teach us tonight about really simplified, a very complicated subject, and that is of cancer prevention that affects most of us. I would be willing to bet that most everybody on the call with us this evening either knows at least one personal friend or family member who has had to deal with cancer. And so let's take a look then at the incidence of cancer. And it's a lot more than you might think. If you want to click through these, Joe, 1.7 million new cases diagnosed just last year alone. 580,000 deaths. That's 1,600 a day. The good news is, and you can see Steve, you love the chart, Steve. I know of the cancer death rates there between 1975 and 2009. So they've come down a bit, but the good news is that cancer deaths are declining. So
and Barb, I would just put that in perspective. That's a tribute to better treatment methods. So we are getting better at treating cancer, but on the other hand, the new cases of cancer are still starting to increase. Mm-hmm. So we need to get better on the prevention side as well.
So people are living longer with cancer.
Right.
They're living longer with cancer.
And they're recovering from cancer to a higher percentage than they did just 10 or 20 years ago.
Mm-hmm. So click, Joe, if you would, and let's look at some of the top causes of cancer deaths. And men, we're looking at lung and prostate and colorectal. And in women, a little different mix. It's lung, same, but breast and colorectal. And
that kind of figures, right?
Well, you know what? I thought it was, that has shifted, hasn't it? At one time, I think it was higher in women was breast cancer. But anyway, I was interested.
Breast cancer is one of the areas in which we've made some amazing treatment advances in the past past 20 years.
Yeah, I sure know lots of survivors from that. I was surprised that there are 15 different cancers attributed to tobacco.
Yeah, tobacco is not a good thing. I mean, you've all heard it. We shouldn't be smoking. We should give up smoking if we are. There's so many different cancers that can be related to smoking.
And if you click through these, Joe, we've got 1,600 people dying each day. 1 of every 4 deaths is from cancer. It's closing in on heart disease as the #1 cause of death in the United States. But this was the statistic that really stood out for me. 1 in every 3 women and 1 in every 2 men will be diagnosed with cancer in their lifetime. So it's going to affect our family members and our close friends. And so we want to really spend tonight looking at what can we do to help prevent cancer. And so, Steve, talk to us about causes of cancer and where it's coming from.
Okay, well, let's start. And Joe, you just click on the first one. We've seen that before. 1.7 million Americans, more than 10 million people worldwide. But in terms of genetic causes, that's really, if you just click forward, that's really in the 5 to 10% range. And what we're talking about here is where there's a clear genetic predisposition, clear genetic cause, something that you can't really do something about. But the remaining 90 to 95% have their roots in the environment and lifestyle. Some of those environmental challenges we can prevent. Some of them are not preventable. We all receive a certain amount of radiation just from solar radiation and from ionizing radiation that comes to us naturally. So there's certain things that are some things that are just part of the aging process and metabolism that we can't really change. But let's go ahead and look at what we can.
No, but let's look at that the American Cancer Society says that cancer is largely preventable.
Right. So we said 90 to 95% are environment and lifestyle, but of those 60, so that's not all of them, but 60% is preventable. 30% of those preventable cancers are caused by tobacco use, but the other 30%, that's just what we eat. Our lack of exercise, our overweight and obesity, those are just key factors in a significant percentage of cancer.
Okay, so the risk factors that we can control, we want to start there because that's something that we can work on. If you keep clicking through these, Joe, first of all, we know about tobacco. Then eliminating tobacco is very important. Maintaining a healthy weight. I think, Steve, a lot of people associate overweight with heart disease, but not so much with cancer, and yet it's one of the major risk factors.
Absolutely. And we're going to, so we'll get to the mechanism of that a little bit later on, but remind me when we get to that, we're going to talk about insulin-like growth factor. That is very tightly related to our weight, and that's one of the things that stimulates cancer cells.
So we're going to go into more detail on each of these, but getting serious about a healthy diet, human bodies were designed to eat the food that nature gave us, that grows naturally out of the ground. And somehow over the years we've gotten seduced.
A little bit out of whack here, right?
Seduced by, these delicious, to be sure, but fried foods and packaged foods, processed foods, the carbs especially, and they are just deadly for cancer. And we'll go into more detail with that in just a minute. Exercise, of course, and then supplements that can help reduce cancer risk. So let's go to the next slide, Joe. Go ahead.
This is where I'd like to really put things in perspective. And yes, in one sense, this is a gross oversimplification, but by simplifying in this way, I hope to help you understand how cancer develops in the first place and what we can do about it. So the 3 stages are initiation, promotion, and progression. So let's look at what happens. Normally when we have cell division, we end up with 2 perfect cells. They look identical, but every once in a while a mistake happens. There's some cellular damage, usually to the DNA. There can be to mitochondria, other parts of the cell as well. And if that's not repaired, normally, we've got a very robust system called apoptosis. You can think of it as cellular suicide, where that abnormal cell simply eliminates itself. It's a wonderful system for keeping us from developing abnormal cells. But what happens in cancer is that first or second mutation aborts that cell suicide or apoptosis system. So now we have that damage, and the cells keep replicating. They don't die. And when that happens, usually in the first or second mutation, you've lost. In the first or second mutation, when we're talking about a cancer cell, you've lost that check on cell growth, of the abnormal cell growth, that apoptosis, but you've also increased the probability that you're going to have more mutations as those cells divide. So then you end up with a third mutation, a fourth mutation. The cells are becoming more abnormal with each of those mutations, and eventually you get the uncontrolled growth.
And that can happen over years.
Yes, that can happen over years. I mean, one of the things that I talk about is that most of us, particularly if we're over 50, have cancer cells in our body. We form new cancer cells probably on an almost daily basis. And we rely on our immune system to zap them before they get out of control. So, what we think of is cancer is something that's abnormal, it's very rare, and these cancer cells hardly ever happen, where the reality is that this is fairly frequent. And if we didn't have the kinds of controls I'm going to talk about in a minute, we'd all be dead of cancer at age 20 or 30.
Wow. So, Steve, just a cancer cell is a cell that has been damaged or is mutated?
It's been mutated. Usually there's damage to the DNA,
right,
which is the genetic information.
Which causes mutation then?
Right. Sometimes sometimes the initial damage can be to other components of the cell, but then as a secondary effect, that causes damage to the DNA, which then leads to a mutation.
Okay.
So when it goes to divide, the DNA doesn't divide properly and it gets messed up. Okay.
Right. That's a very, very easy way to think about why it becomes genetically unstable and these mutations just start to accumulate.
Sure.
All right, so that's what the DNA looks like when it's getting damaged.
Yeah, that blue is a perfect DNA double helix, and there are many ways in which we can damage the DNA. And most of the damage is caused by two things. One is free radicals, reactive oxygen species, ionizing radiation. All of those things can cause breaks in the DNA, which, if they're not repaired properly, lead to mutations in the DNA. But another very large class of damage to the DNA is compounds that stick to our DNA. So let's look at some of the examples down here. Cigarette smoke and polluted air. Now we're talking about reactive oxygen species, free radicals, breaking the DNA, and perhaps it isn't repaired in the right way. Carcinogen in our food. Some of these are things that stick to the DNA. Some of them are things that, because they are hard for the body to metabolize, it generates a lot of free radicals as it tries to destroy them. So both of those mechanisms can be, when we think of artificial flavorings, colorings, preservatives, both of those apply. Benzpyrene from grilling. This is where you put your meat on the grill and you let all that smoke deposit, all those lovely benzpyrenes on the meat that you're grilling, and that sticks to the DNA. And when the cell tries to replicate, it's a really bulky compound that's sticking to the DNA. It can't replicate it properly, so it makes a mistake when it's trying to replicate that DNA. Sodium nitrate and nitrates. These are compounds that are used in most of the processed meats, things like bacon and sausage and that sort of thing. You can get some nitrate from just even in fruits and vegetables if you use a lot of high nitrate fertilizers. And those are converted by the body again to something that sticks to the DNA. And when the cell goes to replicate that DNA, it makes mistakes. And then, I always say, especially I know there's some people that say, well, I just eat organic. I'm okay. I don't get any of those artificial flavorings, colorings, preservatives, and I don't grill my meat. I don't get benzpyrene. I don't eat bacon and that sort of stuff. Well, you got to beware of some of that, maybe peanuts or peanut butter, that organic peanut butter, because aflatoxins are caused by mold. So particularly in peanuts and corn, you need to read the labels. Organic is good, but you want to make sure that it's also certified as aflatoxin free. And that peanut butter you find in the tub in the health food store, and you scoop into your jar or whatever, that probably hasn't been classified as aflatoxin free.
And you
Does that say that on the label?
You don't see it very much. And the label is.
So if you go in the health food store, you start reading labels, you're going to find that the better brands will say that it's aflatoxin free. Okay. But you want to look for that.
And I'm assuming when you say corn, you mean corn products too, right? Corn chips, all things made from corn.
All things made from corn, and unfortunately, if you're getting the highly processed stuff, they've usually taken the aflatoxin out. So we're talking about some of the things, if you have maybe your favorite organic restaurant and it's a corn mush or something like that, you just got to be aware that these things happen.
Corn mush?
Well, it's
it's
a southern thing, Barb.
I guess it's a southern thing. All right, let's go to the next slide, Joe. Okie doke. So let's talk about how can we help prevent this first stage of cancer, and that is initiation. And so fiber you have at the top of the list here, Professor, to flush toxins through our intestinal system before they have a chance to begin damaging cells. So that's particularly important for prevention of colorectal cancer.
Right, and that's things like the benzpyrenes and those things that stick to the DNA. Often they are compounds that will also stick to fiber. So they bind to the fiber, and the fiber just flushes them out of the system before they have a chance to be absorbed.
Oh, that's good. Okay, and so remember, fiber, it comes from plants. So we're talking about vegetables, fruits, whole grains. And then come the antioxidants, and they're very important for protecting DNA from damage and neutralizing free radicals. So we're really emphasizing that what nature gave us, vegetables and fruits, we should be eating somewhere around 6, 8, 9, 10 of those a day in servings. And then the vitamins that fall in that antioxidant category are C and vitamin E, the carotenoids and the flavonoids, and the polyphenols. And I know, Steve, we're not talking about nutritional support for cancer patients tonight, but you might want to make a comment about antioxidants when people are undergoing chemotherapy.
Right, so that's one of the things we often talk about, and it is important to understand that some of the chemotherapeutic agents rely on free radicals to do their dirty work. So, and there's some that in theory might involve some free radical mechanisms. So we just tend to recommend, if you're talking about the antioxidants, stop them a day or two before chemo and wait a day or two after, so you don't have the chemotherapeutic agent and the antioxidants in your bloodstream at the same time.
Yeah, they're listed right there. And then we talk about detoxification pathways that need to be activated. And first of all, I think it's fascinating that the body has detoxification pathways, and that we can activate them with all the cabbage families. So we're talking about Brussels sprouts to cabbage to what else falls in that category? I guess would broccoli and cauliflower fall in that? I think.
Yeah. So I mean, cabbage is cabbage is sort of the highest in some of these things, but anything in the cabbage family. And the interesting thing is here, when I talked about our body is trying to detoxify some of these foreign substances, and sometimes generates a lot of free radicals in the process. Mm-hmm. One of the things that's important to know is our body has more than one detoxification pathway. And what the cabbage family does, and particularly the sulforaphanes from the cabbage family, what they do is to prevent it's kind of shut down that detoxification pathway that generates all the free radicals.
Mm. And it tastes good. And then we have a remarkable product called Liver DTX that is a milk thistle-based wonderful detox program, increases the flow of bile, Flavomax, the flavonoids, and then Vivix. And I think we're going to talk about those in a little more detail as we go along, but Vivix is this remarkable kind of a anti-aging tonic that is very rich in the polyphenol category of antioxidants, and they activate DNA repair and they detox the pathways in the liver. Vivix is quite a remarkable product. Do you want to comment?
Let me just mention the DNA repair pathway for a minute here, because when at the very beginning I was talking about, you've got free radical damage, it's causing breaks in the DNA. You have these compounds that stick to the DNA, and then when the DNA the cell tries to replicate that DNA, it causes errors. If you repair that damage before the cell tries to replicate the DNA, you can prevent the errors from occurring. So that's why DNA repair is so important.
Oh, gosh. And so polyphenols can do that. So this is where the red wine kind of conversation came up because of the resveratrol. But Vivix, what's remarkable about that product is it's so much more concentrated. I think a bottle of that is equivalent to something like 3,000 glasses of wine. So it's a much more concentrated form to guarantee that. Okay, Joe, you want to click?
Mm-hmm.
I always like to say 3,000 glasses of wine without the hangover.
Or the fun.
I was just going to say.
Or the fun. But I'm
There's
not sure
two ways of
3,000
looking
would
at
be
that
all
one.
that much fun.
Not that much.
Okay, let's talk about the full spectrum of those antioxidants, Professor.
Okay, so this is really an important thing. This is one of the things, we hear these things from time to time that vitamin E might cause cancer or beta-carotene might cause cancer, and I think what we need to keep in perspective is that these are almost always with high purity single nutrients. So let's talk about vitamin E. The form that we think of most often with vitamin E is alpha tocopherol. While that is the most common form, there are 8 other forms. There's the beta, the delta, the gamma tocopherols, there's the tocotrienols, and all of these have important biological reactions. But let's just look at cancer. It turns out that the gamma tocopherol is better at preventing cancer than the alpha tocopherol. And when you have this high purity supplement of just alpha tocopherol by itself, it interferes with the body's ability to absorb the gamma tocopherol. So, while the studies that suggest that pure alpha tocopherol might increase cancer risk aren't definitive, it is possible because you're interfering with the absorption of all the others. So what you really want to do is make sure when you're using a vitamin E supplement that you have all that full spectrum of tocopherols working together. And beta-carotene is exactly the same thing, because if you have pure beta-carotene, you're inhibiting the absorption of all of the other essential carotenoids, the zeaxanthin, the lutein, lycopene, and the list goes on and on.
Mm-hmm. It's so interesting, Steve, when I think back, 30-some years ago when I was first introduced to Shaklee products with a degree in nutrition, the thing that really attracted me was Dr. Shaklee's philosophy of whole food concepts, which is really what this is about. It's when we start isolating and concentrating single nutrients. The thing I remember him saying, it's just sort of arrogant of us to assume that just the things that we have, quote, discovered should go into a vitamin, because there's all these other things that nature gave us that are the whole food concept. So you'll notice in most of the Shaklee supplements, it's the Vita E complex, the Vita C complex, even the garlic complex, because they have all the parts just in the same proportion that they appear in nature. It's a very important.
While we're looking at this slide, one of the things when we have the Vita E complex, we have the selenium with it. And again, some of the people may have seen there was this recent report suggesting that selenium might increase the risk of cancer and vitamin E might increase the risk of cancer. And the interesting thing is, in that same study, when they had the vitamin E and selenium together, there was no increased risk.
Yeah.
And this particular diagram, this particular picture here really says it all, because vitamin E is oil soluble. So the vitamin E is those nice, smiling Pac-Mans you see in the healthy cell membrane, because that's where you're going to find the fat-soluble nutrients. The selenium, on the other hand, is incorporated into a free radical scavenging enzyme that's in the interior of the cell. So those are those Pac-Men that are eating the free radicals in the inside of the cell. So if you apply vitamin E and selenium to that picture, you can understand why they're both important and why you need both of them working together.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah.
Yeah, because the cell membrane is pretty much a fatty membrane.
Yeah.
Right.
Okie doke. So that takes us now to stage 2, which is called promotion. Tell us about that. Click again.
Okay, so again, this is basically what we were talking about before, where through a series of mutations, the cell becomes a cancer cell. And then the next thing that happens is those cancer cells start dividing. And in a certain sense, that's going to happen to some extent anyway. Once you've gotten to the point where there's uncontrolled proliferation, that cell will start dividing. But what we've learned over the years is there are a number of things in our diet and lifestyle which can promote the growth of those cancer cells. So take that uncontrolled proliferation and just speed it up even more.
And click again, Joe.
Mm-hmm.
And so you want to comment, so that's when the uncontrolled proliferation is when a tumor begins to form?
Yeah, so uncontrolled proliferation is when a tumor begins to form. And what we need to look at is what are the growth factors that stimulate the growth of those cancer cells.
All right, click. And here's where the sugar comes in. Okay, go ahead.
There's where two things come in. So the insulin and insulin-like growth factors stimulate the growth of cancer cells. So, yes, if we're eating diets that are high in simple sugars, high in refined carbohydrates, we're going to have a lot of sugar in our bloodstream. Both insulin and insulin-like growth factor will increase. But the other thing that I mentioned is that once we become overweight, that also increases both insulin and insulin-like growth factors. So that's where one of the ways in which overweight and obesity increase our risk of cancer.
Oh, okay. All right, go ahead. All right, so we have the insulin and insulin-like growth factors are stimulated by sugar and simple carbs and just carrying extra weight.
You know, the danger there is that a lot of sugar is hidden in foods. You know, it's not always the obvious things that we know have sugar, but you know, we need to start reading labels, you know, and being aware.
The good thing is there's not a whole lot of sugar hidden in Brussels sprouts and broccoli.
True.
That's very good. But you know, the point of that is, really, is that the consumer is really at the mercy of labels and marketing, and it is very clever. And so many of the processed foods make you think that they're natural, makes you think that they're healthy. And your point is well taken, is that the fresher and the closer to nature that a food is, which means fresh salads and fresh veggies and fruit, that really needs to be a part of our diet every day. So, okay, so that first bullet point is about sugar, it's about simple carbs, it's about overweight. Now talk about the wrong kinds of fats, because this is also new to us. We went through a period where we were told all fats were bad, but that's not the case.
Okay, so and you would accuse me of using one of these 50-cent words, the icosanoids, which is, I guess, one of those incomprehensible words. Icosanoids basically are what it says right here. They're hormone-like substances, but they're hormone-like substances that control cell growth. But they're hormone-like substances that the body makes from the essential fatty acids that we eat, from the omega-6 and the omega-3 fats in our diet. And we have, the omega-6 tend to be converted to what we call bad icosanoids, which stimulate the growth of cancer cells. The omega-3s are converted to good icosanoids that prevent the growth of cancer cells. So where do they come from? Well, the omega-6 come from vegetable oils, things like corn, safflower, sunflower, and a lot of our meat, because nowadays very few, we don't get much meat that's grass-fed.
No.
So most of our animals are fattened on corn, and corn is high in omega-6 polyunsaturated fatty acids. And it turns out that the trans fats are even worse than the omega-6 fats.
So when this is where you want to watch the marketing about when they talk about things being fried in vegetable oil, like that was a good thing, or pure vegetable oil. It's like anything fried you want to really stay away from. And the corn, safflower, sunflower oils, this is what the vegetable oils that line the grocery store is about, but they're in all the chips, the crackers, the processed foods are loaded with them. Let's go to the next slide and talk about the good icosanoids.
Okay, so the good icosanoids, those are omega-3s, and again, there are long-chain icosanoids, and those are the ones that are most, or the long-chain omega-3 fatty acids. Let me correct myself. Long-chain omega-3 fatty acids, those are found in fish oils, and those are the ones that are most readily converted to the good icosanoids. Those are the ones that inhibit cell growth. Now, this is another place where you really have to read labels, because the omega-3s from vegetable oils, and here again we're talking about things like flaxseed oil and canola oil. Those are the oils, if you were looking at the supermarket shelf, you'd find them in. But you also find a lot of the foods where they say good source of omega-3s, you need to read the label, because a lot of times it is the flaxseed oil or canola oil if you read the label. And those are what we call short-chain omega-3 fatty acids. And the conversion rate there is only about 10%, whereas for the long-chain omega-3 fatty acids, the one from fish oils, it's over 90%. So you got to eat a lot more of those vegetable oil omega-3s to get the same amount of good icosanoids.
And I want to mention there, because people have asked why don't we use flaxseed oil, and are flaxseed oil tablets as good as the fish oil capsules? And the answer is no.
No.
And this is the reason we don't use them, is because they are not as effective.
Right, absolutely.
In fact, they're 90% less effective if only 10% of them can be converted, So, they sound good, but it is, use flaxseed for fiber purposes. But
there's nothing wrong with having, using flaxseed oil in place of corn oil or safflower oil, putting flaxseeds on your salads, that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
We can get the omega-3s from as many sources as possible, but if you really want to make sure you're getting enough of the good eicosanoids, you want to make sure you have some of those fish oils.
Right. Yeah, that is a really good one. It is so beautiful. And so the next slide is one that just is really important for people to see, because we have dramatically reduced our intake of fish in the Lagoni house, because I just don't know how you can know what is clean fish. And so this is a chart that you got, Steve, from the EPA, and it was just regarding salmon and where it comes from, and it had to do with the amount of contaminants in these salmons from PCBs and heavy metals. And so wild coho and pink salmon eat no more than once a week. Most wild Chinook and sockeye you can have 1 to 2 times a month. Wild Alaskan Chinook only once a month. Now these are wild. The wild is the stuff that we thought
was the best.
Was the safer one, right?
And we haven't got to the farms yet. We're just starting to look at that.
All right, so now if it's farmed in Washington State or in Chile, no more than once a month. Next. And then if it's farmed in Canada, Maine, or Norway, no more than once every 2 months. And I'm thinking to myself, well, if it isn't safe to use more than once a month, and then farmed in Scotland, oh my gosh, don't go to Scotland. It's once a year. It's only safe once a year. And I'm thinking, it's like, well, if it's only safe once a year, then why would we eat it at all? Really? I mean, because that means it's got the contaminants in it. And how would a consumer know any of this?
I don't know what it's like in Chicago, but in North Carolina, you can sometimes find out whether it's farmed or wild, but I don't think most restaurants know whether it's Chinook or coho.
But even still, I mean, this is why we just really, really limit it. It's only, maybe 3 or 4 times a year I have salmon at all. All right, click, Joe. And so that brings us to why I just love this Omega Guard, because this the thing that I have always appreciated so about Shaklee is they are they obsess. I've heard Dr. Daggy say they really obsess over purity and quality, and they developed a way of doing this triple molecular distillation process that it brings it to an ultra pure pharmaceutical grade, and it has the full spectrum. And you just gave us that conversation about the importance of using the full spectrum when it comes to antioxidants, and the same thing is true with omega-3 fatty acids. So all 7 are in that Omega Guard, and it is completely pure of PCBs, of heavy metals, of dioxin, of any of that stuff. And be aware that omega-3 fatty acids, while they're great for cancer prevention that we're talking about tonight, and this is now, we're in the promotion stage 2 of cancers, that it helps with that, but it also helps all kinds, it's because it has natural anti-inflammatory qualities. So it helps improve and prevent eczema, any of the itises, colitis, arthritis. Those are all inflammation of something, and very important for the brain. I think it's something like 60% of your brain is fat, good fat. You need it for your eyes, your joints, learning, memory. I mean, it's just a remarkable product. I take quite a lot of them. I take about 4 or 5 of those a day, and my HDL cholesterol levels have been so fantastic. They're like over 100 since I started taking that level. So it's a really important product. Okay, click, Joe. Okay, Steve, let's talk about then what we can eat to prevent the promotion stage. So we talked about some of the supplements. So click right through these, Joe. We want to be eating low-fat proteins. We want to avoid fried foods.
Meat rather than the corn fat.
Okay, olive oil-based salad dressings. Now, you got to watch that. I make my own salad dressing, and it is so easy to do that with olive oil. But actually, it was Suzanne Chaney who told me how you've got to watch any of the salad dressings you buy in the stores. You got to watch. Very few of them have olive oil bases to them. Okay, mono and unsaturated oils. So we mentioned canola and olive oil.
And by the way, those are not because they're converted to eicosanoids, but they are, if you're using those in place of the omega-6, you're decreasing the risk that way. See? These are monounsaturated. These are not giving you these aren't omega-3s, except canola oil, you get both monounsaturated and omega-3s in that one, so it's kind of a double bonus. But the olive oil, you're using that in place of what you probably would be using, which would be the omega-6, which is bad for you.
Okay. Olive oil, yes, okay, right. So, but peanut oil and grapeseed oil, did you want to comment on those? Because you've got to...
Those are also monounsaturated oils.
But if you're going to do stir fry, the thing to remember is you want to use oils that have a higher smoking point. Right. So that are made for higher heat, because when you see your olive oil smoking in your skillet, that means it's breaking down, and that's a bad thing. And then limit farm-raised consumption. Okay, next slide, Joe. So now we're going to talk about differentiation. So explain this to us, because we're still in the second stage of cancer promotion. Go ahead, Steve.
Well, so this is one of the things I think that is important to understand is that the body has a balance between proliferation and differentiation, and most cells can't do both. So if you are a fully differentiated cell, you're going to be a skin cell, a bone cell, a neuron. That's what we call about differentiation. And if you're going to start proliferating, you lose differentiation and you choose proliferation. So it's a balance between the two. Normally we start as an embryo and we've got cells that are dividing, they're proliferating, and then as they differentiate, they become specialized cells and they've got very limited growth potential. But with cancer, the process is reversed. These cells that once were very differentiated and very specific become less differentiated. They acquire that uncontrolled growth potential. So one of the ways that we can prevent promotion is to get some of these cells to reverse this and stop proliferating and start differentiating again.
So click, Joe.
This reminds me of one of Dr. Shackley's founding principles when he talked about health begins at the cellular level.
Absolutely. And with cancer, it's all at the cellular level.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So now there are nutrients that help prevent cancer from promoting by improving the differentiation and limiting the proliferation. Right. Yeah. So proliferation means the multiplication of right.
Right. So again, this is where you have the carotenoids, which become vitamin A, but because both vitamin A and D stimulate differentiation and they slow cell growth. So you want to make sure your diets are adequate in those dark green, leafy, red, orange vegetables and in vitamin D.
So those of us who live north of Atlanta, vitamin D is really, really important to supplement with. And the good news is it's so inexpensive. And the Shackley Vita D3, I love that one because it's so well absorbed that people get their vitamin D levels up. You want that over 50 at least. 70 is even better. Okay, click, Joe. And now we get to stage 3, Professor, progression.
Okay, so now you've got the cells that are proliferating, the tumors are growing and spreading, and it's at this stage that we rely on our immune system to zap those cells before the tumors can get too large. And I already sort of talked about that earlier on the call when most of us have cancer cells in our body, even small tumors in our body, and we're relying on our immune cells to destroy those tumors before they become malignant, before they get too large and they get out of control.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so let's look at what we can do to help stop that progression. And there's those antioxidants again, because immune cells use those free radicals that kill the cancer cells. Then the cells.
They've got something called a phagosome, and what they do is they engulf the cancer cell. It's also what they do with bacteria and viruses, and then basically they bombard it with free radicals to kill it.
Oh, cool.
So our bodies, our immune cells are actually producing a lot of free radicals. So they have to, they really need the antioxidants to protect them from the free radicals that they are producing.
Mm. Ninja Turtles.
It's really fascinating, though.
Yeah,
what
how
the
body
immune system.
works.
But see, free radicals. I mean, antioxidants are not in meat. They're not in dairy. They're not in sugar. They're not in
flour.
Cookies. They're only in the plants that nature gives, the vegetables and the fruits. Okay, then B vitamins and protein. So we need those to make the immune cells. Go ahead, tell us about that.
Well, when our body's under attack, and this is the thing that we think about most is a virus or bacteria. The body needs to respond very quickly, and they start with one immune cell that has a memory of that being an invader, and they need to make many millions. But if you've got a cancer cell that's growing rapidly, it's the same sort of thing. You can't just rely on one or two immune cells to do the job. You've got to develop an army of immune cells. You need to do it in a very short period of time.
Mm-hmm. So when you're getting serious about cancer prevention, you don't want to be taking just one multivitamin every other day. You want to be really saturating your cells with as many good nutrients as you can, so it can really rally and get its own immune system into place. And then that brings us to iron, zinc, and trace minerals.
And again, I don't want to go into details here, but they're required for specialized proteins for the immune cells, so you need to have enough of those as well.
Okay, and then that brings us to probiotics, and boy, 10 years back, people hardly ever talked about it. Now you hear it on every yogurt commercial. but they're really, they're so important. 70 to 80% of our immune system is located in our gut. And the things we eat and throw into our gut, we just damage it so. And it's like one of the first things that really zaps our immune system. So keeping a healthy gut and feeding, and again, good, if you concentrate on the vegetables, a lot of the other stuff kind of takes care of itself, but really work on that 6 to 9 vegetables a day.
And Barbara, this is an area that's a fascinating area that's really just opened up in the last few years. But what we're learning is the kinds of foods that we eat on a regular basis change the population of bacteria in our gut. And if we eat certain kinds of foods, which tend to be the fatty foods, a lot of meat, that sort of thing, we have a population of bacteria in our intestine that tend to take the foods we eat and turn them into cancer-causing chemicals, which we then absorb. If we have the friendly bacteria, which we can make sure with a great product like the Optiflora, and if we eat a lot of fresh fruits and vegetables, we have a totally different bacterial population in our intestine, one that's much more friendly to our health.
And this, of course, is the real dilemma for parents, is that the processed food, nobody denies, is delicious, and it's so hard to get broccoli to compete with Cheetos, but it is absolutely critical to the lifelong health of that child, let alone to us as adults. So very important. So emphasize the fruits and vegetables, and then we need B vitamins, protein, minerals, all of that from as natural a diet as we can. So we can do that, or click Joe. We can look to supplements that can supply these essential nutrients in higher and more dependable levels. And I I work a lot with people, and I remember Margaret Mead, the famous anthropologist, who said it's easier to change a religion than it is to change how you eat. And so I'm very sympathetic about that with people, is that it's easy. The vitamin part is the easy part. You can just take a vitamin and then begin working on the diet one piece at a time. Work on, one new recipe at a time. Find a main dish salad that's so delicious that it makes your mouth water just thinking about it, and then homemade soups. I mean, tonight I made a homemade, red lentil soup. It was so good, but it had 6 different vegetables in it. Parsnips and celery and carrots and onions and garlic, and you can make great stuff that way. And so just work at it one at a time. So one of the best places to start is Vitalizer, because that is such a comprehensive daily strip, 6 tablets on it, but it contains 80 different nutrients, and then some really healthy protein. And I really like the vegetable proteins, so the Shaklee 180 or the energizing soy, I like those because the vegetable protein is so much easier on the gut, and soy in and of itself has some cancer preventative, or at least lowering risk of cancer properties. Vivix that we've talked about, this amazing polyphenol liquid, kind of a tonic, daily teaspoon of that activates the longevity genes in our cells and helps to repair the DNA. And then Nutriferon, which we haven't talked about yet, but Nutriferon is quite a remarkable product. It was developed by the immunologist who discovered interferon back in the 50s and then spent the rest of his professional career indexing and cataloging all these different plant extracts till he found the combination that helped the body produce its own interferon naturally. So anything you want to say there, Professor, about those guys?
No, I think you covered it very well, and you've got the Nutriferon slide here, which I think you've already covered.
Right, but you might want to mention, as a cancer researcher, how you feel about Nutriferon.
Well, I think the science speaks for itself. There are not many nutritional supplements that are created by Nobel Prize winners, we need a strong immune system, as I said earlier, every day of our life to zap those immune cells, those benign tumors, as soon as they're formed.
Okay, click, Joe. And then here's the Vitalizer. All of these nutrients are in Vitalizer. Then if we just add to that the protein and the Nutriferon, that's a pretty complete program, Steve. And then click to the next one, and you can see this is what the daily strip looks like. It has 80 nutrients. That little pearl in the bottom, that's that probiotic that Steve talked about. There's omega in those top 2 capsules. There's the multivitamin Vital E, and then there's a B and C combination. And look, it's equivalent to 50 grams of sardines, and I don't know about you guys, but I don't snack on sardines.
Oh, Barb.
I know, and so I'm real happy to get them from that. 7 medium oranges, 8 cups of milk, 15 servings of steak. I mean, really, it's just, you couldn't even eat that much food, but it's such an easy, affordable way to get that protection. And then just as one more to mention that remember that our immune systems are damaged by a lot of things that are just part of our lifestyle, starting with stress. And never underestimate how damaging stress can be to the body and to the immune system. And Steve, even cortisol can stimulate cancer cells to grow?
Absolutely. So that's something you want to avoid.
And that's what's produced when we evoke our stress response. And so there's a couple of products that some people live with a high level of stress. And so that what's so remarkable about the stress relief complex is it blunts cortisol production, which is really helpful. And then I put in B complex, which is probably my most favorite product that Shaklee makes, because it turns every woman into Mother Teresa. And it just helps people, helps your brain, your nerves, just helps you deal with things. And even things like yoga yoga and meditation and prayer. Those things are all helpful for getting ourselves centered and calm. And then we'll work on the diet. We've talked about that. Get rid of the sugary, carby foods that understand how addictive they are. That, these new researchers are finding that in our brains where we get addicted, and that's the word they use, to sugar, to carbs, to wheat, to gluten, is the same place we get addicted to cocaine and to opiates. So we understand that addiction. We understand those cravings, and getting on the healthy food and getting on those supplements. B-complex helps me a lot with cravings. It's just perfect. And then minimize toxins. And while we haven't talked a lot about the Shaklee cleaning product line and the skincare line, but they're all designed to just help us live in the most toxic-free environment that we can create. There's so many things we can't control, but we can certainly control the cleaning products that we use in our home. Okay, and then final thoughts, Steve?
Well, we've talked about this. Cancer, people sometimes think of cancer as something that they caught like a cold. And I think if you've gone through that three-step process, you kind of understand cancer takes years to develop. It's little things that we do over the years that are cumulative. There are a lot of things that we can do to reduce our risk. We can't control genetics, but that's really a small part of cancer. We can't control all the environmental factors. So, the bottom line is, if you or a loved one develops cancer, never blame yourself for what you did or didn't do. Because we can do a lot of things, but we can't control everything.
And I suppose if we all live long enough, we all will probably develop some level of cancer. So this is why we just want to be aware. We live in a world that has a lot of toxins in it, and so it's just, to me, it's helpful to understand how I can be proactive around it. We have a lot of questions coming in. Joe, do you want to field a few of these?
Elaine asks, what about the peanuts you grind yourself? I suppose it depends on the source of the peanuts.
Yeah, that's one of the things where I would check with the supplier, with the store, and say, can you guarantee that these are aflatoxin free?
Yeah. Barb, do you want to tell us where the webinars are archived?
They're archived at betterhealthin31days.com, and you can look to the person who invited you tonight to see if they have a subscription to that, and if not, you can get access to that going to bobsfiles.net.
I'm taking a large amount of Carotamax for cancer. Should I be also increasing vitamin E as well, or something else to make sure the absorption is balanced?
Steve?
I think that what we talked about was really a balance. I think if you start with the vitalizer, and you can add extra E, you can add extra Carotamax, Flavomax, and that's going to be a personal choice. But I think you do want to maintain balance as much as possible.
Okay, regarding omega-3, can you comment on krill oil, Krill, versus Shaklee omega-3?
There's been a lot of talk about krill oil. So I think the important thing to understand is that krill oil is no better than fish oil. It is the fish actually get their omega-3s by eating the krill. The other thing is, Shaklee's omega-3 is certified as sustainably attained. I don't know. There's a very detailed certification process that indicates that they're not depleting the fish supply in the way that the omega-3 has been taken. But the other thing to keep in mind is that even krill are not an indefinite resource, And they are, in fact, the food upon which the fish depend. So I'm not sure that if we look a few years down the road, we may be starting to worry about whether we're gathering our krill in a sustainable manner as well.
Mm. And whales, isn't that a major food source for whales? Krill?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I thought it was too. Kaylin, you asked about posting our webinars on Facebook, and we would suggest you not do that. And one of the reasons is that we try to be candid when we talk to you about the information that we give here, but that's why it's under a password-protected website when we archive it. So thanks for asking that. I appreciate that, because that we're glad to share it. We can talk about it, but we can't really put it out there, just for Shaklee's protection as well as our own.
Good point, Barb. Mary says that she read any kind of canola oil was not good, that it wasn't a real oil. What about coconut oil?
Oh, I like coconut oil.
Coconut oil, coconut oil it's interesting. It doesn't appear to be as bad for you as we thought a few years ago, but it's not a source of omega-3s to a significant effect. It really doesn't fit into this picture at all. And the canola oil again is the parts about it being not good for you, that's mostly hype. I think the concern is that it is for a large extent a genetically modified crop, which means, again, not that it's going to harm you when you take it in, but it's one that encourages a lot of pesticide and herbicide use, and that can harm the environment.
And you too, if it's in the canola oil when you.
Well, one of the points I've made, and I've had a couple of things in the health tips from the professor where I've talked about this. When we talk about oils, or we talk about individual nutrients, or even sugars that are developed from genetically modified foods, they have been purified to the extent that they're identical whether they come from genetically modified or non-genetically modified sources.
Yeah.
So it's not a health concern. What it is an environmental concern for, if you're using a lot of, and I do believe that's one of the things that they do with the canola oil is they have, it's one where they spray the fields with lots of herbicide.
Steve, you want to comment on soy as a phytoestrogen?
Well, it is a phytoestrogen, and what it does is it binds to the estrogen receptor, but it's much weaker in its effect than estrogen itself. So what it does is it protects the body, when at times when the estrogen levels get too high, which can occur in obesity in particular. That's another reason why obesity is highly linked with, say, breast cancer, because you've got all these fat cells in the breast, and they're all pumping out lots of estrogen, and so you get estrogen-responsive tumors in your breast cells. It can substitute for the estrogen and prevent that from occurring. So if you actually look at it's one of these myths that's been floating around for a long time. And if you go to healthtipsfromtheprofessor.com, I've actually put together a video called The Truth About Soy, where I go into the facts about that. But the facts are that, in fact, it decreases the risk of breast cancer, not increases it.
Yeah, very good. And same way, you want to comment on GLA, which is, I guess, technically an omega-6.
It is actually it's a third class. So it's not exactly an omega-6. It's not exactly an omega-3. It is metabolized a little bit differently, and its effects, for the most part, are the same as the omega-3s. And that's very simplistic statement of a whole lot of biochemistry.
But it produces a prostaglandin that reduces inflammation, and inflammation is also a cancer is an inflammatory condition as well. So it's kind of the short story, but it's good. Good. Okay. Anything else, Joe?
Well, if someone has stage 3 melanoma, is there any benefit of taking extra Nutriferon?
Well, again, now we're talking about treatment, and I really don't want to go there.
Yeah.
What we do know is that interferon is something that has been used successfully to treat melanoma, and I'll just leave it there.
Yeah. Do you want to? What types of chemo drugs interact with Nutriferon? That's a hard one to answer too.
But yeah, I don't know of any that interact with Nutriferon. But that would be one that you would ask Health Sciences.
Mm-hmm.
And I know you were talking, Steve, at one point about, if you're doing chemo treatments to stop, was it the antioxidants?
Mm-hmm.
And about 8 years ago, my sister was going through treatment for breast cancer, and that's exactly what she did. She followed a very good regimen of Shaklee supplements, but then, stopped them, I can't remember, 2 days before chemo, and then 2 days, started them 2 days after, or a day after, or something like that.
Day before, day of, and day after. Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's what it was.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But generally speaking, and we'll talk about nutritional support for people undergoing cancer and how the cancer treatment affects the body. But generally speaking, vitamins are like food, especially the Shaklee ones. They're like food tablets and food subs. So you're nourishing the body. It's not like taking a medication or a drug, and that's why people often do take larger amounts, knowing that their body is under siege. And so when in doubt, for me, I personally take more because I just am aware of, before I even knew about Shaklee and really began even changing my diet in such a serious way, I think of all those years of my life when I didn't, and I didn't know, that things that I was eating I thought were healthy and weren't. So I err on the side of more when I just feel, to me logically, it just feels like I'm feeding my cells, and then I let my cells pick and choose what they need.
Mm-hmm. Barb, do you know what the topic is for next Monday night?
I do. It is Healthy Home, Healthy You, because Earth Day is next Tuesday. And so we want to talk about how we can walk more lightly on the earth and talk about non-toxic cleaners, but we'll talk about other things too, including allergies and
well, it's a good adjunct to this webinar in terms of creating a non-toxic home.
That's right.
The more things we can get in our favor, the better.
Mm-hmm.
I think that does it. Thank you so much for such a highly valuable and greatly informative webinar, Barb and Dr. Steve. This was great.
Good. Thank you all for joining us. So we'll see you next week, and Lisa Anderson will be leading us in that Healthy Home, Healthy You segment. Thanks again, Steve. Always a pleasure, and thanks, everyone. We'll see you all next week.
Good night.
Good night.